biggest drug on earth is not alcohol, it's not cocaine, it's not pot. The biggest drug on the planet is problems.
Tony Robbins, I'm so excited.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Tony Robbins!
Our deepest fear of all human beings, I don't care, I've dealt with princes, heads of countries, presidents, the top athletes in the world, the top entertainers, Academy Award winners, doesn't matter who it is. They all have a fear that they're not enough. That's part of being human. And if we feel like we're not enough, that feeling leads to a deeper fear, which is we won't be loved. And that feels like psychological, emotional death, to be worthless and unloved. So what we do is we come up with a story to protect ourselves. And the story is, well, I'm too old, or I'm too young, or I don't have education, or I don't have enough money. So how do you get out of that? We deserve to be free of fear. I think that's the ultimate spiritual gift.
Tony Robbins, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for the time and for you being here. I've been at UPW, I think 9 years ago in London. And yeah, we are so excited to have you here in Germany in September. So in 1 month, we're really excited. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about being here in Germany again after 20 years, I think?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on. I hear you're the top spiritual coach in the whole country there. So it's a privilege to be with you. I thank you for the invitation. And as far as coming back, I married my wife 25 years ago. I think the last Unleash the Power Within I did in Germany was, I took her on a date there. So about 24 years. But I have come back to do just a 3-hour component twice. And it's been so great to be back in the country. And people have so much passion and energy and commitment there. You know, Germans are people that get things done. I love that about them. So it's really aligned with my philosophy. I'm not into, airy-fairy things. I'm in a very pragmatic, how do you get the greatest quality of life possible? How do you create that in a way that's truly measurable and not only produce results, but as you know, really be fulfilled? Because I think success without fulfillment is a failure. And there are a lot of people that have achieved a lot, but they are really not happy. So I want to make sure people achieve more and are more fulfilled, and you can accomplish both. That's been my obsession for almost, 47 years now. I started when I was 3, I'm sure. Right? I really love being able to serve people, and it's going to be wonderful to be back in Germany to do this total immersion, 4-day process we call Unleash the Power Within.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And when I've been in London and I've seen you there, and I saw you last year when you've been in Cologne, and
Yes.
I had the feeling that you also had your own transformation, right, in the last 10 years. And I had the feeling that when I saw you in London, you were also more in the let's get shit done kind of mentality. And when you were here in Cologne, I had the feeling you were more connected to your heart, more heart-centered, more concerned about real fulfillment from the heart, not only in the mind, but really in the heart. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, what maybe your transformation has been in the last 10 years and what shifted inside your inner world from the head to the heart.
Well, I think I've always been driven by the heart, but because of my style is very passionate and very rapid. And, so people who associate spirituality usually associate to a slow tempo, a more balanced component, but we're all wired differently. And so I've always been focused on both. But I would say the last 15 years or so, I've been more focused on making sure people experience both at the highest level. When I started, it was really about how to help people get results. And that's what personal power is, the ability to take action and get results in spite of what normally stops people, including spiritual oriented people, which is fear. Right. So how do you tap into that part of you that in spite of the fear gets you to move forward? It's like, how does someone drive down a street where there's nothing but a broken yellow line and someone's coming at you at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour on the other side? And how do you do that when, every day people, are texting and kill someone, they get drunk and kill someone, they fall asleep and kill someone? Well, the only way you can do it is with that, little word called faith. And we're born with faith. We don't have to learn faith, but if we don't use it, we lose it. It's like any spiritual or emotional muscle. Passion unexpressed gets weaker. Courage unused gets weaker. And so I've always had a focus on producing results and action. But I'd say in the last 15 years, part of it is I have 5 kids and 5 grandkids. Part of it is going through the experiences that we all went through in COVID, where we had to adapt and find a way to still help people around the world when the whole world was being shut down. And I have I have a 50-year-old daughter, and thanks to COVID, I have a 3.5-year-old daughter. So for the first time, I wasn't traveling 250 days in a year, so I could stay home. And we decided one more shot at it with my wife and I. So, I have 5 kids, 5 grandkids of every, range. And I think that plays a role in all of it. And part of it is just maturation of living enough life. I'm 64 years old right now, so I've been doing this for 47 years. And if you don't grow, what the heck would you be doing in this thing? So I've grown, I think, both in my results. I've got, 114 companies. We do $7 billion in business. I had no business background. It's miraculous. I've had the privilege of feeding over 1 billion people, who are in need. I've been able to work with people from every walk of life, from the most challenged to the most successful. So as you go across that, you start seeing patterns. And one of the patterns I saw is people achieving a lot and not as fulfilled. And I felt very fulfilled, but I thought, how do I put more focus into that? So that's really it. It's the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment. When you put them together, you create an extraordinary life.
Let's dive into that, because I think this is so fascinating. How can you actually become successful and fulfilled? Because when I look into the world, I have the feeling that a lot of people use success to kind of numb their fear or their feelings of maybe not being good enough, or the feeling of losing themselves. And what can someone do to really understand themselves, understand the patterns that maybe make them do things where they think they will be happy when they have the success, but in reality they don't? So how can people really create success and fulfillment together?
That's a great question. By the way, people use it both ways. And a lot of people use spirituality because they feel inferior, they don't feel enough. And so, you can't measure that. So most people's like, if you don't think I'm spiritual, then you're obviously not spiritual, right? People don't want to talk about their body or their bank account or their business or their career because it's very measurable. And so I believe we got both. It's like East and West, right? If you go to India, you'll find people living destitute, but they're happy. It's mind-boggling. If you go to Varanasi, one of the oldest cities in the world, as I'm sure they've been burning bodies there because the belief in their country is if you are, whatever sect you are, if you believe if you arrive in Varanasi to die, you don't come back, which is their version of heaven, right? And so they burn the body and no one cries, no one is sad, nothing like that, because they all believe the body is the t-shirt, it burns, and then the spirit is free. And people are literally going there to die and they're happy. They're totally fulfilled. And then you see people in the West who have got everything they could ever dream of and they're miserable, right? So I believe you don't have to pick between the two. And the answer to your question is you have to figure out what is it you want to serve that you care about more than yourself. The disease of mankind, all the problems we have that you see in the world are really man-made, and they're all based on one fundamental, which is selfishness. And we all have it. But if it dominates your life, you're going to be miserable, because what makes us feel alive is not getting things. What you get never makes you happy. Who you become will make you very happy or very sad. And so if you can find something that will give you that drive, people say, how do you get yourself motivated? Well, everyone's motivated. Some people are motivated to help their family. Some change the world. Some people are motivated to eat, right? So we're all driven. What are you driven to do? My job is to find that inner drive in you and wake it up. And once you know what that inner drive is, it's usually to serve something more than yourself. Because when you care about something more than yourself, you have a different kind of motivation. There's 2 types. There's push motivation, where you're trying to make it happen. Well, that takes huge willpower. I have a lot of willpower. I bet you do too. But there's a limit to willpower. There's no limit to pull motivation. Pull motivation is there's something here that you care about so much that you'll be driven to do more, give more, be more, become more, share more. And that's what makes us feel alive. It's not the getting. Lots of people get what they want and then they go, is this all there is? Or they get what they want and they're happy for how long? 6 years? No. 6 months? No. Somewhere between 6 hours, 6 days, and 6 weeks usually is how they stay happy. So I believe you got to figure out what is it you really are here to serve? What is it that you really care about most? And then you put a plan together that has both action for results, but the fulfillment is natural because it's aligned with what you really are here to deliver in the world. Most people are looking at what life will give them. my belief is life is calling to you to bring something to the world, whether it's being as a father or a mother or a friend or a business person or whatever it is that you do as a person who serves the community. And when that happens, there's an energy transformation. And what I've done over the last 47 years is study the most successful people in the world, not only just successful in results, but successful in fulfillment. I said, what are some of these common patterns? And then I what I call E-cube it. I put it into an immersion experience. If you and I go to learn language in another country and we learn a little bit at a time, if we don't use it, rarely do we remember it. But if I dropped you in Italy and said, I'm not giving you a language person, I'll just pick you up in 90 days, you know you're going to be speaking language 90 days from now because you're in immersion. You're seeing it, hearing it, feeling it all the time. So I created what I call E-cubing immersion. Immersion means we go like 12 hours a day. Most people wouldn't sit for a 3-hour movie that someone spent $300 million on, and they'll come with us for 12 hours a day and be out of their mind because, time is emotion. If you hate what you're doing, a minute feels like eternity. But when what you're doing is so fulfilling, time just disappears. And the way we do that is we E-cube, which means we entertain people first. Because even though, we all think we're, an information society, the information society died a long time ago because there's too much information. People are drowning in information. They're starving for wisdom. So we get them first entertained because we're an entertainment culture. We make them have the time of their life. But then the second E is we educate them with the actual strategies and tools to change your body, change your emotion, change your finances, change your relationships that work, that are proven. And then while you're with us, the third E is we empower you to do things while you're in state. So you don't just go learn something and go away. In fact, Stanford University did a study for a year, and they did it during COVID. They came to me because they had 2 professors who were being treated for clinical depression. And they came to one of my programs, a 6-day program. I do an immersion program. And they both came out with no need for any form of medication. They're both no longer clinically depressed. And the head of the piece at Stanford came to me and said, I've never seen anything like this. What data do you have on this? I said, well, I have millions of graduates from 193 countries around the world. He goes, no, I mean like scientific data. I said, well, if you want to do a study, let's do it. And he said, I'd love to do one on depression because it seems so dramatic. And during COVID, as you know, most people are stuck at home and depression levels went through the roof. Drug use went through the roof. Alcohol use went through the use. Suicide went through the roof. So I said, great, let's do it. I said, but if we're going to do it, tell me this. What is the standard for treatment? And they said, well, if you look at the meta studies, multiple studies, only 40% of the people that go for depression treatment, which means they're being treated with drugs and or therapy or both, only 40% get better. And they on average get 50% better. So still 50% depressed. Some get totally well, but very few. And most of them are on drugs for most of their life. And he said, 60%, no matter what we do, don't get any better. I said, well, you could almost get that result with a placebo. And he laughed and he said, yeah. I said, I think we can beat that. I said, what's the best study you've ever done in the history of psychiatry? It was done at Johns Hopkins Hospital. They did it 5 years ago, and they gave people a month of psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, and cognitive therapy for a month. I said, well, something should have changed when you did that for an entire month. They said it was the greatest breakthrough in depression psychiatry in history. 53% of the people, after a month of these drugs, psychedelics, and a month of cognitive therapy, 53% 6 weeks later had no symptoms. They never seen anything like it. And I said, well, why don't you use them as the contrast group? We'll use no drugs and we'll do 6 days, 5.5 days. Well, I'm really proud to tell you, they did the study. And the first thing that blew their mind was 6 weeks later, the study numbers were so high, they're afraid they're going to get canceled. So they sent the information out blind to 3 other organizations, came back the same. 100% of the people after 6 days with no drugs had absolutely no symptoms of depression. 19% of the people had suicidal ideation, and none of them had suicidal ideation. And they followed them for a full year. And a year later, they were better, not worse. And this is still in the middle of COVID, to give you an idea. They had reduced their negative emotions 72%. They'd increased their positive emotions 52%. said nothing like it they've ever seen. So they're now doing several other studies with our work. But the reason is we put people in this immersion environment and it rewires your biochemistry. It doesn't require drugs to do it. And it's very enjoyable. As you know, you've had some experience of Unleash the Power then when you went to the UK. So I'm super excited to bring these results to people here in Germany.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And what I think in the world of coaching, I mean, what you do, what we all do, we help people to let go of limiting beliefs. And when you talk about how people can or need to find their passion, to have something they really want to live for, very often once we find it, there come in those creepy thoughts and those limiting beliefs and the thoughts that, well, there are so many people already doing it, or I cannot earn money with it, or like all these beliefs that come up. How can someone who is actually on their path and maybe already found what they really believe in, what they like really want to do in life, how they want to serve, but they are limited by their beliefs. They have this glass ceiling. They just cannot, or maybe are not even conscious about that they have those beliefs. They just don't get the next step. What are your thoughts on it? And how can someone really solve those limiting beliefs on an unconscious level so that consciously they behave differently? Because I think this is the most difficult part, right? I mean, consciously we can believe in everything, but if our unconsciousness doesn't go along, nothing will change.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. To me, it is you've hit the nail on the head. To me, it's the most important thing of all if you want to create lasting change. Anybody can change for the moment, but the reason people change a year later, 5 years later, when they do these studies is because those core beliefs have changed. And so, and like you said, many times people are unaware of them. So I developed a process years ago, almost 20 years ago, I developed it. And I think you experienced it when you went to the program, probably in London. And it's called the Dickens process. And we do it every time I do the seminar. It's on day 3. People, on the first night after we're done, we actually walk on fire, as you know. And it's not about fire walking. It's about facing your fear and getting yourself to do it anyway. And when you're in front of 1,200, 2,000 degree burning hot coals, you have a state change, and we teach you how to overcome the fear and take action anyway, right? Because that's all these beliefs are. They're limiting beliefs because they're based on fear. I'm not enough. I've tried everything. No one's going to respond to me. Whatever the story, all the good ones are gone. That's why I can't have a relationship. And as you said, many are subconscious. So we do a process that's about 3 hours long. It's incredibly intense and beautiful. And people find out what those beliefs are. They're different for everybody. We haven't picked their top 3, and we eradicate it. We get it out of the body, and then more importantly, then replace it. And I know the value of this in my own life. I can tell you, growing up, I had 4 different fathers, and it was a confusing time, as you might guess. I wasn't the most popular kid in school, and yet I loved people. And I couldn't understand how the most popular kid was mean to me and all my friends all the time. And I was like, I didn't understand. So I started trying to study what was going on. But then my father at that time, my 4th father, he would always let us know that we are on the wrong side of the tracks and people don't care about us and no one cares about anything but themselves. And so I was an angry young man because we lived in a community where we were the have-nots, and, kids can be kind of brutal. I wasn't in the cliques and so forth. And one thing changed my life, and this helped me understand. You can believe something, but an experience changes your belief. You can believe what China's like, but you go to China and you'll have a different experience and you'll start to know what it is. A belief is a poor substitute for an experience. So what I like to do is take the belief and destroy it and give people a different experience. How that happened for me was when I was 11 years old, my family was, always poor, and my father had gotten fired, and on Thanksgiving, which is an American, holiday where you have feasting, so it magnified everything. We had no money and no food, and we wouldn't have starved. We had saltine crackers and some peanut butter, but it wouldn't have been like a nice dinner. Certainly not a feasting dinner. And my life was changed because a man knocks at the door, and my mom and dad were yelling at each other through this wall, through this door. They're screaming at each other, and my mom was saying things to my father he'd never forget, and vice versa. And I have a younger brother, younger sister. I'm trying to make them not hear this. And I go open the door, and there's this giant guy standing with 2 bags of groceries and an uncooked pot of turkey on the ground, a frozen turkey in a pot. I'm like, excuse me. It's like, well, how can I help you? He said, is your father home? I said, just one moment. And I went to go get my dad. He's like, you answer it. I said, I answered it. And he came to the door, and long story short, he was not happy. he said, "We don't accept charity." And he just went and slammed the door on the guy. But the guy's foot was there, so it bounced off his foot and stayed open, which made my dad more mad. And he goes, sir, I'm just the delivery guy. Someone knows you're having a tough time. Everyone has tough times, and they want you to have a nice Thanksgiving. I'm just delivering it. Please accept the food. And my father said, "We don't accept charity." Went to close it again. And this time the guy's shoulder was leaning in, so it bounced off his shoulder. And then he saw me, and he said something. I thought my dad was going to punch him in the face. He looked at my father and said, "Sir, don't make your family suffer because of your ego."
Wow.
And I can still see my dad's veins in the side of his neck, like lining up. He turned flush red. I thought he was going to punch him. He grabbed the groceries. He slammed the table. He slammed the door. Didn't even say thank you. But that day changed my life, because it's like I developed a new belief that day. And the belief was strangers care. I mean, how can you explain this? This person wanted no credit, and they came and brought food to our home. And it changed my entire life. It's why I'm here right now. It's like, if strangers care about me and my family, I got to care about strangers. And it led me to, when I was 17, I've had 2 families, and then 4, and then 8, and then 12. I eventually got to 1 million people a year. And then about 9 years ago, I was writing a book called Money Master the Game, where I interviewed 50 of the most wealthy people in the world who started with nothing and figured out how they built their financial freedom. It's called Money Master the Game. And so Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, Carl Icahn, the biggest in the world. And while I'm interviewing these multi-billionaires here in America, we have something called food stamps, or the SNAP program, and it's designed for people who don't have enough money for their families to survive. And our Congress cut it by $3 billion, which means every person who needed food would have to give up a week's worth of food if people in the private sector didn't step up. So I called my office and said, "How many people I fed in my lifetime?" I didn't know the number, and it was 43 million. I was like, holy cow, that's really pretty cool. And I said, what if I fed 50 million people, a lifetime's worth in 1 year? What if I fed 100 million? What if I fed 100 million for 10 years? And I'm proud to tell you, we did that in 8 years. I finished it last year, and now I'm working on a 100 billion meal challenge. I'm already up to 63 billion because of the war in Ukraine, which is the breadbasket for much of Africa. So I'm working with the UN and a group of people there that are really sharp, and we're delivering food around the world. So all those things became possible because of the change in my belief. As long as, we're at the effective things, as long as everybody hates us, no one cares about us, why would I care about them? So I'm grateful for the pain, but I'm even more grateful for the different belief. That belief changed my entire life. It's why I get the chance to talk to you right now.
Thank you so much for sharing. What I find so interesting about the story, that I think so many people in this moment would have chosen a different belief. Maybe they would have thought about, my father doesn't care about me, but you focused on the person that actually brought something to you. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that sometimes we have a situation and the question is, where is your focus? Is your focus on the person that is actually taking something away from you, or is trying to take something away from you, like your father was in that moment? I mean, you could have also created a belief about that, right? But you chose to create the belief about the person that was giving something to you. So maybe people could...
Well, when you say thinking, what is thinking?
Yeah.
Well, I'm asking you what is thinking by asking you a question. So is it possible? I remember one day I sat down and said, what is thinking? Well, what am I doing right now? I'm asking myself a question. Could thinking be just asking and answering questions? And I thought, that's a question too, isn't it? And I went, and so is that. I did this for about 25 minutes until I realized all thinking is asking and answering questions in your mind. But we have habitual questions. So if you're constantly saying, why does this always happen to me? It doesn't. But your brain will find it. How come I can never lose weight? Your brain will go, because you're a pig. If you ask a lousy question, you get a lousy answer. And so one of the things I realized back then, I didn't realize it that day. I realized it probably about 5 years later, because my father, right after that happened, left our family. And it was, at the time, the worst thing I'd ever experienced, because I loved him so much. I had 4 fathers, but he adopted me. My name comes from him. And so I was so hurt and so sad, but I know why he left, because there's 3 questions people ask every moment they're alive subconsciously. If you awaken to them, you can ask them consciously and change your life. And the first question is, what am I going to focus on? Like right now, as you and I are talking, there are millions of things people be focusing on. Me, you, something we're wearing, something we said, something in the background, what I'm going to have for dinner later, what's going on with my kid. There's unlimited things we could focus on, but the brain can only go focus on a few things at a time. And whatever you focus on, you feel. Focus equals feeling, even if it's not true. If you think someone has done something wrong to you, and someone tells you something and you say, no, they're my friend, but no, two people tell you they did this. And now in your mind, they did it. And now you're hurt and you're angry. And then you finally confront the person and find out they didn't do it. It was a misunderstanding, right? But when you focused on it, it was real to you. So we have to learn to control our focus, and most of us don't. What's wrong is always available. So is what's right. But if you don't direct your focus, what's wrong is the brain's negative bias, the survival brain, makes you go there. And so you live in a place of reaction. The second decision we make, or we ask ourselves, it's a question we ask, it's a decision, is, okay, what am I focused on? What does this mean? Is this the end or the beginning? If you think it's the end of a relationship, you're going to behave very differently than you think it's the beginning of a relationship. In the beginning, you'll do anything. In the end, it's like, why even waste, right? So our beliefs, our meanings come from the way we construct what we focus on. Is this person, dissing me? Is this person challenging me? Is this person coaching me? Is this person loving me? Whichever meaning you come up with produces emotion. And the emotion is what controls the third decision. What am I going to do? If the emotion is anger, you're not going to behave the same way as if you're feeling grateful or playful or fun. So I'll give you an example. With my father, I know the answers to these three questions were different than mine, because my first focus was there's food. What a concept. I was so grateful. His first focus was he had not taken care of his family. And he was angry with himself, so that anger went out everyone else. If you're so, if I rub your arm like this, no problem. But if you got a big scar there, an open wound, I can touch you with a cat hair and you're going to react. Well, he was already that way, feeling not enough for the family. So his focus was, I didn't support my family. And I know because he said it all over and over again. And then the second question, what does this mean? His meaning for that was that he was worthless. How do I know? Because he said it out loud over and over again. And he decided what to do was to leave our family. Worst day of my life, I thought. But for me, I focused first, there was food. But the thing that changed my whole life is, what does this mean? That meaning of strangers care. That's why I'm here. That's why I've done all I'm doing. I don't have to work another day of my life. I'm fortunate enough at this stage, but I can't not give. It's like what I'm made for. And it's because I love people. I love strangers. People, it sounds ridiculous, but I really do. I'll do anything I can to help. And people feel that when it's authentic. You can't fake it for decades, And so I have. I've done it and lived it. But it came from that day. And then what I decided to do was someday feed another family, which led to 2, led to 1 million, led to, 1 billion meals now plus. So those three decisions are the difference in people's lives. And so I'll give you an example. If your listeners or your viewers, I asked you, there's different patterns of focus. Just use that one. One pattern is, do you tend to focus more on what you have or what's missing? You work with a lot of people. What do most people you deal with who are frustrated are focusing on? What they have or what's missing?
What's missing, of course.
Always.
Of course,
right?
Of course.
And then think about that. If you're constantly focused on what's missing, you can't stay happy, even if you achieve a lot. And that's what a lot of achievers do, the ones you're talking about. They achieve a lot, but they're always, it's never enough. What's missing? What's missing? What's missing? At the same time, if you start with what you have and you feel really fulfilled, you're not in scarcity. And so now you can achieve more because you're in a more complete state. More of you is available. A second question to ask your audience, and they can answer this for themselves, is, do they tend to focus on more what they can control or what they can't control? What's your experience of working with people when they're not happy?
What they can't control.
That's correct. Yeah. So if you've combined those two, if you're constantly focused on what's missing from your life and what you can't control, you're going to be angry or frustrated or sad or depressed. It's predictable. And then the third one is, and by the way, when I go to seminars, I do this. I got a room of 15,000 people in a stadium, and you'll hear people say most people focus on what they don't have, what's missing. But the people in my seminars do focus on what they can do. That's why they come, because they want it. They know subconsciously some way I can take back control. They just don't know how. And then the third one is, do you tend to focus more on the past, the present, or the future? Now, we all focus on all three. But people who are most unhappy, what do you think they spend most of their time focused?
The past. Or a horrible future.
A horrible future. You got it. You've worked with enough people to know it. Well, the truth is what most achievers do is focus on a future, but they're not present to feel what's going on here. And so it's never enough, right? What we show people is how to enjoy the present and anticipate the future. If you make 3 changes, you focus on constantly focusing what you have and you're stacking gratitude, and you're focused on what you can control, because there's plenty we can't control. And you focus on the present you can enjoy and the future you're going to create. That is a different life. I ask people, I got an audience, 15,000 people, I'll say to them, how many of you know someone that takes antidepressants and they're still depressed? And 90% of the room raises their hand, no matter where I go in the world. That's because antidepressants only numb you. They don't deal with the problem. The problem is you're constantly focused on what's missing. Problem is you're constantly focused on what you can't control, and you're probably focused on things from the past as opposed to the present, or like you said, a horrible future they're anticipating. They're listening to someone telling them the world's going to end in 12 years because the entire ecology of the earth is going to go away, which we all know is bullshit. But excuse my French, Scheiße. I'm doing German. But the point is, it's total BS. We all know it's BS. Any intelligent person knows it's BS. But when you hear it over and over and over and over again, people start to absorb it and believe it. So we have to take back control of our own internal thought process. And these 3 decisions are one of the easiest ways you can do it for anyone. And I show people how to wire that so you don't have to think about it, so it starts to really happen.
Thank you. What I find really interesting is that there are so many people who have kind of a problem addiction, I would call it. So they're kind of as if they cannot be without drama or without victimizing someone else or without, creating negative thoughts within their, it is like an addiction. So what is your thought on that? That someone who really wants to change something, but it's like a gummiband, I don't know the English word, like a thing that always pulls you back again into your old state. What can someone do about this problem addiction and the staying in my old habitual inner state?
Great question. It's super important because I tell people the biggest drug on earth is not alcohol, it's not cocaine, it's not pot, right? It's none of it's not anything you can think of in that area. The biggest drug on the planet is problems. And the reason is because our deepest fear of all human beings, I don't care, I've dealt with princes, heads of countries, presidents, the top athletes in the world, the top entertainers, Academy Award winners, doesn't matter who it is. They all have a fear that they're not enough. That's part of being human. You may not feel it in this moment, but we all feel that. And if we feel like we're not enough, that feeling leads to a deeper fear, which is we won't be loved. If I'm not rich enough, smart enough, funny enough, beautiful enough, happy enough, playful enough, whatever enough, I won't have what I really want ultimately. And that feels like psychological and emotional death, to be worthless and unloved. So what we do is we come up with a story to protect ourselves. And the story is, well, I'm too old, or I'm too young, or I don't have education, or I don't have enough money, or some story that becomes the wall to protect us. It's not my fault. It's just these things. Or it is my fault. I'm a horrible person. I'm not good enough. And they go in that mode. So you'll come and reaffirm them and give them attention. Those are the 2 basic approaches that people have. But it's just being human. I've dealt with the most successful people in the world that have that, right? So how do you get out of that? Well, it's an addiction to protect yourself. The way you get out of that is by a radical change in your mental, emotional state. Meaning, most people after COVID still have not recovered. I'm not talking about recovered from COVID. I'm talking recovered from being so sedentary that they don't really use the body anymore. Our body is what changes our brain. If you go for a run, anyone who's done it, even if you're not good at it, you just run fairly consistently, you get what's called runner's high. You have a biochemical change. Well, I've been teaching people for decades how to change the way you move, change your voice, instantly change how you feel, not in a fake, phony way, like I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, and your brain goes, BS, you're not happy, but in a real way where your biochemistry changes. And after doing this, and that's what people do with me, the reason we do 3.5, 4 days is immersion. No one would sit for that long. The reason people can go when they wouldn't go to a 3-hour movie is because they're fully engaged with their bodies, their emotions, their energy, their vitality. And that's also why it lasts, because it rewires the way your nervous system got wired originally. So you don't need the fear of trying to protect yourself anymore. So we do that by changing the body. Now, Harvard did a study about 4 years ago and proved what I've been teaching for 40 years. They called it power postures. And what they did is they found out that if you stand like Superman or Batman, your shoulders are back, your hands are on your hips, right? And you're breathing fully with your head up, within 2 minutes of doing that, your entire biochemistry will change. Number one, your testosterone will explode. About 25% increase in your bloodstream, whether you're a man or woman, doesn't matter. Now, what testosterone does is it makes you focused. It makes you driven. It makes you go for it. It eliminates a lot of your fear. And then usually when you get a lot of testosterone, your cortisol also increases. And cortisol is the stress hormone. So yeah, you get pumped up, but you're so stressed. Well, what they found is if you lean back like this, your legs out, like the guy that's obnoxious in the business meeting, or if you stand like that Superman pose for just 2 minutes, not only do you see about a 25% increase in testosterone, but you see about a 30% decrease in cortisol. So what happens is you're 33% more likely to take action than you were a moment before if you'll just do that for 2 minutes. Now, I don't teach people to stand and put their shoulders back. I show them how to move and use their voice and body in a natural way that changes everything. If you were talking to me and you said, Tony, how do I get out of depression? And I said, I think you should probably try to find a way to get a compelling future. Right? Your whole energy is going to drop also. I can put you in depression, right? You're doing it, right? When someone's depressed, they have a certain physiology. Their shoulder drops. Where's someone's head when they're depressed? You've worked with enough people. Where's their head? That's right, down. They talk loud or quiet. What would you say?
Quiet.
Fast or slow?
Slow.
That's right. So here they are talking like this and nothing like this. If you just put their shoulders back, you start to talk more rapidly, you make a more rapid gesture, you will instantly see their biochemistry change. And there's no question about it. Now, if I get you in a habit of doing that, which I can do in 3 days, all of a sudden you have a new life. And now you're no longer running to all your excuses and problems to try and show you're still a good person. It's not my fault that I don't have what is. I'm still worthy of love. You don't need all that BS anymore. And so that's why people's lives change so much. That, with the change in beliefs that you and I just talked about, the combination of those two is really phenomenal. That's why Stanford's seeing these results a year later without me ever talking to a person again. It's like, some people think, well, isn't that seminar just going to pump me up and I'm going to go down? No, all the study shows it actually increases over time because you rewire yourself. That's what's different about what we do than some motivational stuff.
Yeah. I have one thought I would like to share with you, and I'm interested in your perspective on it. So what I find in our time of life we live in, most people of us are used to spend their money on material things. So it's normal for us to buy a car, to buy clothes, whatever. So we give worth to material things. We know, okay, if I pay this, I get a car, I get my pullover, whatever. And I find that what is really difficult for a lot of people to understand the value of not material, immaterial things, to value that. And I sometimes feel that people very often think, to spend money, to go to a seminar, I rather spend that money on, I don't know, whatever, a new pair of shoes or something that I can actually see and touch and feel. So we are so accustomed to give only value to things we can actually touch or hold. And we are so not used to give value to things that are not visible, who are only inside of us. So maybe you can share some of your thoughts about that. How can people start to value their inner world, and that the most important investment you could ever do is to invest in your inner world, even though if you cannot see, actually, when you pay for it, you won't see it in that minute, but you will see it in a year, you will see it in 10 years, you will see it later. So maybe you can share some thoughts on that, because I think this is a really interesting concept, right? That for so many people, it's so difficult to see the value in something they cannot directly see or experience.
Well, as a young man, I had the same belief, obviously, as most people do. And my family grew up poor. And so I worked when I was still in high school. I'd worked 2 jobs, and then I had to support my family. We didn't have enough money. So one weekend, my wife, or my mom at the time, actually told me, she said, listen, there's this friend of ours, And I'd heard his name several times before. And he used to be, my dad said, he used to be such a loser. And now he's really successful. And he buys and sells homes in Orange County, California. And he needs somebody to help, strong to help do moving this weekend. So I had the weekend open. I need to earn the money. So I said, sure. So I went and worked for this man. I worked my guts out. And he really loved my work ethic. So he said, I want to take you to lunch. So he took me to lunch and he goes, tell me a little about you. I mean, you really give your all. And so we had this conversation. And then I said to him, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. I said, my dad said you used to be such a loser and now you're so successful. I didn't mean to say it that way, but it's like, it was true. Only kids say what's true, right? And the guy looked at me, your dad said, what? And he said, well, it's pretty true. I said, so what changed your life? And he said, I went to a seminar. I never even heard the word before. So what's a seminar? He says, well, a guy who's been incredibly successful over decades, not once in a while, who shares with you the best of what he's learned so he can save you the time. It's like, how do you compress decades into days? So you don't have to go through that trial and error learning. I said, wow. I said, so you went to the seminar? He goes, it changed the way I looked at life, changed what I was doing, changed my career, changed my finances. I said, how long was the seminar? He said, 3.5 hours. I said, wow, that's a long time. And I said, how much is it? And he said, $35. That'd be like $250 in today's dollars based on inflation, right? So I said, wow, I make $40 a week as a janitor. That's a week's pay. I said, I don't think I can get there. Could you get me in? And he said, yeah. And they didn't say any more. So I said, will you? And he said, no. And I said, well, why not? He said, because you won't value it if you don't pay for it. I said, well, it's a week's pay. I'm on my own. My dad went back east. My mom kicked him out. I told him the whole story. He goes, I don't want to hear your story. He said, the bottom line is, if you want to learn on your own, it'll take you years or decades, or you can learn in an evening more than you'd learn probably in 10 years. And I go, well, I don't know if you'll pay my rent. He goes, well, you'll never pay your rent till you learn these kinds of tools. So I remember it was like the biggest decision of my life at the time. I really thought it was a huge decision. It was a life-changing decision. So I took a week's pay and I went down to this little 3.5 hour seminar. And it was very basic. It was philosophy. It was like, for things to change, you've got to change. For things to get better, you got to get better. It was very fundamental tools. But I left there on fire. And I started changing my life in every way. And then I went to work for this man and I learned to do speeches and share with people. And then I became just obsessed with any solution to any answer I could possibly find. So I learned that I interviewed Warren Buffett for my financial books, right? I've written 3 #1 bestseller in New York Times on finance. So Money Master the Game. And I said to him, what's the most important investment you've ever made? And I knew it was investment. So I thought he was going to say Coca-Cola or Geico or one of those companies. He goes, Tony, it's what you do. I said, well, I do a lot of things. What part? He said, well, I went to Dale Carnegie when I was just getting started. And he said, Tony, it was the most important investment I ever made in my life because I learned how to communicate. Otherwise, all my ideas would have died on my lips. He goes, everything has come from that. And just recently, he was interviewed about inflation because in America, we have a huge amount of inflation now. And people are saying, what do you do about inflation? And he said, it's really simple. You need to invest in you first. He said, because whatever improvements you make in you, if the dollar went to nothing, if we were using seashells and you're the best webmaster, you're the best lawyer, you're the best speaker, you're the best whatever, you'll get the most seashells. He goes, you don't have to worry about inflation if you invest in you. And plus, no one can tax it and you got it forever. And he said, those are the most important investments I've ever made in my entire life. And that's what you have to do. So most people, though, are so trained. Like I remember I hired a guy to run one of my companies that I took public. And, to give you an idea, I've gone from nothing with no business background. I now have 114 companies. We do $9 billion in business. So I hired a guy who was the head of CBS, one of the largest television networks, for a business I had. And one weekend, he told several of the team members he was going to Harvard for an extension course on leadership. And people were like, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? You've already been to Harvard. And he's like, well, I want to get better. So, it's changed over the last decade or two. But people are funny. We think that we have to have a problem to improve ourselves. When in reality, as there's 2 worlds, right? There's the external world, the internal world. Well, you can't control the external world. You can influence it. You can take total control of the internal world, what you think, what you feel, and what you do. And that's what controls the quality of your life. How many people you know that achieved everything and they're miserable or committed suicide? And then other people that their life was really rough and yet they're so happy and fulfilled. So I believe you want to do both. You don't have to choose. between I have a spiritual path and I'm not pragmatic and I can't achieve in the world. And you don't have to go, oh, I'm just going to go achieve all these things and wonder why I'm feeling empty. I believe East and West coming together is really what humanity is really made for. And I think that's why people come out of Unleash the Power Within so on fire and why it lasts, because they're fulfilled and they're achieving. They're not picking between the two. But if you had to pick one to work on, the internal world first, because that's the one that controls everything, how you feel, how you live, how you experience. And that's what I encourage people to do.
What is your definition of spirituality?
Well, I look at, a lot of people use it as a catchphrase, right? I look at it as consciousness. How conscious are you is directly related to how much you care. So some people are, they care about themselves. That's their entire focus, which is appropriate if you're 0 to 5 years old. But if you're 40, you've missed the boat. That's why you're going to be unhappy, right? So we all start out egocentric, where everything is about me. In fact, a child, up until the time they're 3 or 4 years old, if I hold up this color as blue and the back is gold, and I show you blue, gold, blue, gold, blue, gold, and I show you blue, what am I seeing? They can't imagine you see something different than they do. They're not even wired for that yet. But eventually we go from egocentric to ethnocentric, where we care about the people around us. You go into the schoolyard and you learn you can't just have it your way. You got to care for your friend. They care for you. And we start to get socialized. Gradually, hopefully we get to a point where, we're no longer egocentric or not just ethnocentric, our group, right? We start to actually become focused on the spiritual side. In other words, we care about everybody. And there's a part of caring about everything. That's a graduation in your spirituality. In other words, your consciousness is the measure of what you care about that doesn't benefit you. If you care about all the things that benefit you, that's not a really spiritual approach. But if I can care about someone and not just say I care about it, but I do things for those I don't know who can't reward me, that's when your spirituality grows. I mean, I've fed, now it'll be 65 billion people by the end of this year. And it's like, I don't know 90% of them. I've planted, I have a plane, so I want to be conscious about my green footprint. I found out I burn 3,000 trees a year. So I've planted, 71 million trees on the way to 100 million trees. And I've not just planted the trees, I've built them in farms in Western Africa and Eastern Africa, where people usually have one crop, and we teach them how to create these garden forests. And so now they have a crop every month. And they go from making $1.25, which is not enough to survive, to $12. And that makes them wealthy in that community. I've met 2 people that I've had the privilege of doing that for. So if you're just doing it for accolades, it's a trade and you don't feel spiritually alive. But when you're doing things because it's what your heart and soul wants to do, and it doesn't necessarily benefit you, everything benefits you, because you can't give to others and not feel better about who you are as a spirit, as a soul. And so my whole thing is get people out of that selfishness that we've all been trained to be in, and wake up to the fact that there's a reason why you don't get unconditional love like you did when you're first born. Even if you didn't think you were loved, if you survived, somebody loved you, right? Or you wouldn't be here. They put your needs ahead of theirs, or you wouldn't have made it. So why does that go away? It goes away because otherwise we'd all be selfish brats, all demanding what we want. We're here to deliver to life something more, and that's what makes us feel alive. Growing and giving. Those are the only things give you long-term progress and long-term alignment. Like happiness comes from progress, and progress comes because you grew and now you have something to give. That's really what changes people's lives for the long term.
In the beginning, you said that faith is something we have to use so that it is there. What is a practice everyone who's listening right now can take with them to strengthen their own faith?
I think it's, I have a daily practice myself. I call it priming, because in the world, we get primed all the time. We think thoughts are thoughts, but they have more to do with what's going on in the environment. So, there's a study done at Harvard where they took 2 actors and they sent them out into the community and had them do the exact same thing with 100 people each, with one exception. They walked up to people at the mall or at school or wherever they were, and they said, "Excuse me," and they're holding a cup of coffee, and they said, "Would you hold this for a second?" And they look down and hand the coffee to the person, and then they pull out their phone and they do something on the phone, and they reach back and take the cup back. And they go, "Thank you very much." And they practice doing it the same way with the same facial expression every time. And they took a man and a woman and they went out and did this, and they did the exact same thing with one exception, which is half the time they handed them iced coffee, and the other half the time they handed them hot coffee. Well, 15 minutes later, a person with a little checkboard comes walking by and they say, here's $20 for literally 1 minute of your time. No catches. I'd like you to read this little story. That's 4 paragraphs. And then tell me what my question is going to be. Who is that person? What do you remember about the main character? Well, the people who are given iced coffee, 82% of the people said the person was cold and uncaring in the story. Same story to people having the warm coffee, and they said the person was warm and genuine or caring. And the only difference is 15 minutes earlier, they were primed subconsciously. So I do a process to prime myself. I teach in all my seminars. It's a little process, takes list 10 minutes a day, and I do 10 minutes specifically, because if I say 20, you say you don't have the time. And what it does is it primes you to be in these ideal states. And the best way to prime yourself is with gratitude. Because of all the human emotions, the ones that mess our lives up, mess up our relationships, make us unsuccessful, make us unhappy, it's fear, number one, and anger, number two. And they usually get played off of each other. You can't be fearful and grateful simultaneously. That's the beauty of it. You can't be angry and grateful simultaneously. So I have a process that puts you in a peak state. And then I spend my morning, the first 10 minutes, I spend literally just a couple minutes each on 3 things I'm really grateful for, but I don't remember them over there. I step on my body, feel it, see it, experience it. So it literally changes my biochemistry. And then I see 3 things that I want to bless or be grateful for, kind of like a prayer. And then I think of 3 things I want to achieve, and I see them as done. I feel them as done. I feel the celebration. That whole thing takes only 10 minutes. But by the end, you are wired in a very different way. Now, when things happen, you're coming from a very different state. Otherwise, you wake up in the morning, what's the first piece most people do? They pick up their phone and they start reading all their messages. Some are, oh, some are, and they go through all this stuff. And that becomes their ritual, and their brain is wired to be in reaction from the moment they wake up. So you do this for 10 minutes and you have a different life.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. The very last question is, you talked about being fulfilled and successful, or being spiritual and successful, to combine both worlds, East and West, you said. I know many people who are very spiritual, but who are afraid of being successful because they think it's bad, or they take something away. Or there are many people who are very successful and they think, I don't need spirituality. So maybe some final words on how to combine those 2 worlds. How can you embrace both and really allow yourself to discover your own spirituality, to be actually really successful, but also to allow yourself to be successful and to discover your own spirituality?
Great question. The combination on both sides that they don't realize is fear. The person who's out there to achieve, they're afraid they're not enough and they're trying to prove it to themselves. The person's like, I'm not into that stuff. You know, I meditate every day. I'm spiritual. I send only good feelings and all that stuff. They're afraid that they're going to fail if they try to achieve these things. Fear is the common denominator. When you take away the fear, they both happen naturally, because doing something you love for people you care about is something that feels so spiritually alive, because it's about more than just me. You know, life is not about me. It's about we. That's what makes us fulfilled as human beings. And so when you're doing something and you're achieving and it's measurable, it feels really good. And when you're doing it in a way that is meaningful, meaning it's fun to serve, it feels incredible. And so it becomes a positive addiction to do both. But you have to get over people's fears, and there's no way to do that except experientially. And that's why I do these events that are, you say, well, why do it for 4 days, Tony? Can't you do 3 hours? Well, yes, I've done 3-hour events, but it's not my preference, because I can inspire you in 3 hours, give you some tools. But if you do this with me every day and night for 12 hours a day, and you're having the time of your life for 3 or 4 days, at the end of it, this is how you live. And again, I don't have to tell you that like a promotion. I mean, you can read the studies by Stanford. They can't believe it. One of the things that happens in business is something called engagement. Since COVID, they measure engaged versus disengaged, which now people call quiet quitting if you follow people on social media, which is how do I do the least amount and keep my job? And then there's now active disengagement, which means loud quitting, which means they work for the company, but they're trying to hurt the company while they're doing it. They're angry. Well, the largest, and this study was done in 114 countries, including Germany, The largest drop in the history of the world of measurement has happened in engagement since COVID. And the largest growth in active disengagement's gone through the roof. So Stanford did a second study, 1 year long. Usually a study's, 35 people and maybe 3 months. They did the largest behavioral study ever, 1,500 people for 1 year, put them into my event, measured what the change was. They made up for 3 years of COVID, almost 4 years of COVID in 6 days, literally turned around. And then they kept measuring them for a year. And I never spoke to them again. And their level of fulfillment, engagement, excitement, passion, results measured through the roof every month continually for 12 months. That's because you're getting rewired. That's why we do it this way. If we just spoke these things, you'd say, okay, that makes sense. Maybe I'll do it. But when you get in your body, it's a very different experience. And so to me, that's what we're doing to get them engaged both in the level of consciousness, which is caring, and achievement. And they don't have to be chosen between the two. It's really the only thing stopping is fear. Those spiritual people that won't go to work and do things necessarily are afraid they're not enough. The people working their tail off to try to produce result are afraid they're not enough. When you know you're enough, now you're doing things for a different reason. You're not trying to prove anything. And humans, naturally, all the parts of you come together. It's not something I do. It's something that is your nature when fear is not controlling it.
Thank you.
By the way, achievers don't think they're fearful. I'll tell you something. One last thing. Achievers don't think they're fearful. They think they're just stressed. but if you say, what are you stressed about? Well, I got to make this happen. What if you don't? Well, it'll be terrible. What if it doesn't happen? Well, then I'll fail. What if you fail? Well, then I'll be a failure. Right? If you follow their trail of stress, it always leads to fear. So on both sides, that's what it is. And we deserve to be free of fear. I think that's the ultimate spiritual gift, is to be free of fear. It doesn't mean you're never fearful. It just means it no longer controls you. You can push through it. And that's a giant part of what we make happen during Unleash the Power Within.
Thank you so much, Tony. I'm so excited to give you like a big hug when you're here. I'm so excited.
I'll see you at the event.
Yeah, I will see you at the event. I'm so excited about it. So 5th of September, you're going to be here and I'm really excited. Thank you so much really for all the work you do, for not giving up. Also, I mean, you have so many things in your life as well. And just thank you for being you and for doing the work and inspiring all of us, and sending you so much love and blessings, and see you in Cologne in a month. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for being you. You have a beautiful persona, but that persona is inside coming out. I can feel it in you. So that must be why you touch people so deeply, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much.
Take care. Blessings.
Blessings. Thank you.